I think the notion that you gain quality by focusing is wrong. I think in order to gain quality, you have to understand the parallel disciplines that surround whatever you're doing in order to do your job well, because at the end of the day, the home is a system.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk Podcast, our regular discussion with building industry professionals. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Corey Claunch, Vice President of Sales and Operations at Remy Steel Windows and Doors. You can find the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk Podcast and the original Fine Homebuilding Podcast at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. You can leave feedback and ask questions there too. Corey, thanks a million for joining me today, man.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here.
Can you please tell me a little bit about Remy Windows and Doors and what you guys make and the origins in the company, if you would, please?
Sure. So Remy Steel Windows and Doors are a manufacturer, of stainless steel, thermally broken steel windows and doors. We are located in Spicewood, Texas, out in the hill country right outside of Austin. That's what we've been doing for a few years now, but that's not necessarily how the company started. Peter Remy is our owner, and he actually started the company. He got his start when he took a class at the local community college, ACC, for code and arc welding. From there, he received a grant to go study technical welding at a trade school in Germany, and there got an impressive amount of certifications in regards to welding stainless steel and copper and all sorts of other metals.
Were these architectural projects, or were these art, or what was he welding?
So on the way he talks about it is he wanted to get his hands on anything he could possibly do that was hard.
Cool.
So he walked into the school and just said, throw the book at me. What's the hardest thing I can do? And at the time it's the 6G pipe test, which is to take two pieces of pipe at a 45-degree angle and have to create a weld all the way around. And so you would have to do that on various different metals and all the way up to copper. And so he said, just give me the hardest things, and that's what I want to do. And so he completed those classes and came back with all of that under his belt, decided that he wanted to focus on building hand-forged architectural ironwork here in Austin for high-end construction. So that's how it got started. From there, he gained a few clients within the high-end construction industry, and he had one client approach him and said, hey, these steel windows and doors are getting pretty popular. I want you to build some steel windows and doors for me. And so he thought, well, that can't be as hard as some of this other stuff I'm doing. And so he decided to take it on, and at the time actually made a trip down to Mexico and helped design a very thin profile steel window and door system, and was having it made in a plant down in Mexico. He did that for a few years, and the way he tells the story is he started to get a little embarrassed with having to tell people as a metal worker that his product was made in Mexico. And after having to deal with some quality issues they're coming from there as well, he decided to bring it all here, and we moved all production to the States. And ever since then, we've used all American labor and sourced everything from here.
How many employees does the company have?
We're at about 36 right now, I believe.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So can you tell me what are the advantages of steel windows and doors? In my experience, that was a thing that was very popular around the turn of the 20th century in industrial and commercial applications, but it's pretty new to the residential market. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. It had a brief period in residential construction. You did have some steel windows that made it, but it very quickly became, it just didn't make sense in the residential side to make things out of steel, at least with the sizes and the types that they were making. But a lot of the advantages that you get from steel fenestration has everything to do with what it can do structurally. You can
heavy. Yeah.
Big, heavy. You can take an entire wall of your house and make that a steel glazing system without introducing, extra posts. Essentially, as long as the engineer, the architect can carry the load of the header, a steel window system can span that without having to introduce large reinforced molds in between.
What kind of wind loading?
Maintain a very thin profile.
And what kind of wind loading can a steel window array be built to withstand?
Pretty substantial. And
Uh-huh.
what I mean by that is it's really not hard to meet the minimums. So if you're talking about your basics, DP30, DP35, it's pretty easy for steel to hit that. But part of the benefits of steel is you can maintain a pretty thin sight line, and all you have to do is make it deeper.
Mm.
And once you make that deeper and just slightly wider, it's impressive some of the wind loading that it can take. And it's been interesting to watch our engineer design around some of those things as well, because a lot of the times what you have to take into account is the deflection in the glass rather than the steel, because the glass obviously is going to deflect way sooner than the steel. And what happens in failure most of the time is the glass will start to delaminate from the glazing pocket. And so it's because that glass is
It's
actually
physically being
deflecting so much
pushed
more
out
than
of
the
its
steel.
recess.
Exactly. It's starting to bend out. And so a lot of the times you actually want to make sure that that steel will bend and deflect with the glass to eliminate some of that separation. And so it's an interesting balance of rigidity, but also making sure you add a little bit of deflection in there because you want it to bend together to make sure that it doesn't fail.
So I'm guessing specifiers like steel windows and doors, because of the things you've already talked about, they can be big, they can be very
Yeah.
strong. Are there other advantages besides
Yeah.
those two?
I mean, the other large advantage is just aesthetics. The aesthetics in the field. We hear a lot that people will operate one of our doors and close it, and we get a lot of, man, this sounds like a bank vault. And there's just a perception there that there's a security. It makes people feel a lot more comfortable in terms of the doors that they're putting on their home. And then there's just the aesthetic of the fact with steel, a lot of the times it is still true divided light, which you're not going to get unless you go to some higher end wood clad product. And so there's just a look there with the old putty glaze look that you get with steel fenestration that I think is just very attractive, and it harkens back to, like you mentioned, the early 1900s.
You told me earlier that you guys, like most window manufacturers, or virtually all window manufacturers, have your glass made elsewhere. Are there any limitations to glazing when you're talking about steel fenestration?
Really, not necessarily. The limitation has everything to do with the glazing. With steel, we can support enormous spans of glass, and so a lot of the times the question is, where does the glass have to come from, and how large can the insulated glass unit be, and then what's the depth to make sure that we've got the glazing pocket to be able to accommodate the depth. And you can imagine with whether you're trying to build somewhere where it's a colder climate where you're going to need triple pane IGUs, then you just need a larger glazing pocket to accommodate that. The frame can take it. It's just a matter of whether or not the glass can handle whatever load you're trying to put on it.
You mentioned earlier that one of your company's points of pride are your thermally broken frames. Can you tell me a little bit about how
Yeah.
that works,
Yeah.
and does it really aid the energy performance, which I think you probably agree has always been the kind of
Yeah.
trade-off with steel fenestration, right?
Yeah, it's been a huge limitation of steel fenestration. Is you build something out of solid steel, it's going to be better than solid aluminum for sure. Steel's not going to conduct nearly as much as aluminum will. However, it will cause condensation issues. It'll be hot. It'll be cold. Anywhere up north, you'll have ice on the inside of your windows. So introducing a thermal break in the steel is critical, just in terms of controlling the heat transfer or the cold transfer inside to outside. The struggle within steel is strength, because the large benefit to having steel is that you're gaining a substantial amount of structural support across the system. And you can imagine, if you thermally break that system, you're eliminating the majority of that. We actually developed a design for a thermal break system in house where we're able to maintain that structural property, even though we're having a thermal break in between. And it's something we're actually pursuing a patent on right now, which we're excited about.
What are the typical U factors or R values for folks who are savvy about this stuff with your products?
you know, we're never going to be a passive house window. That's for sure. But I would say it's not insane to get down to a U value of somewhere. If you're using just a standard dual pane IGU, I think it's not crazy to think that you can get down between a 0.29 or a 0.32 on a U value.
Mm-hmm.
On a solar heat gain coefficient, and essentially follows the glass. But beyond that, if we get down towards, if you're using a triple pane IGU, I think we can achieve something in the low twos, like a 0.23 or 0.21.
Can you tell me, what are the typical architectural styles where you're finding these products? And geographically, are there parts of the country where this is more popular than others?
We really span everything from traditional to contemporary. Contemporary architecture, they pursue steel because of the thin lines that you can get across large expanses of glass. So it's very popular in contemporary architecture. But then if you look at traditional architecture, that old putty glazed look that everyone's looking for, where you're really making the window part of the jewelry of the front elevation of the house or part of the furniture inside the house, that becomes highly sought after for steel. And so we really see our windows getting put in just about everything, every architectural style you can imagine across the country. Whenever I came to work for Remy, it really surprised me to see the desire for steel, even in like the Rocky Mountain region, which surprised me that you'd put steel anywhere near the mountains.
Because it's cold.
But once you add a thermal break into it, because it's cold.
Yeah,
exactly. What you have to deal with there is just so different than what you have to deal with in Texas. But once you add a thermal break into the system, it's amazing what you can achieve from a performance level, but also that's just the look that everybody wants in that region.
So part of what motivated this conversation between us was one of the regular podcast listeners wrote in with a question about the current trend for black and very dark colors on the exterior treatments of windows and doors. And they were asking, does that create any additional problems or unforeseen problems, I guess would be a better way to say it. Have you seen that?
Yeah.
Is that a problem?
It definitely is something to take into consideration. With steel, it's not near as a problem that you would expect within other windows and doors. In fact, just in my past and working with different fenestration manufacturers, usually you're introducing steel to help control deflection within window frames because of dark window frames. I used to deal with an aluminum window and door manufacturer that had a thermally broken door, and we consistently had problems where the thermally broken door, particularly when the winter months hit and the sun would rise in the morning and it would heat up the outside of the window or the sliding patio door where the inside was still nice and cold. And if you open that door, you could not get it shut again and get it locked because it would bow. And so there was always that struggle of how do you control that? Usually it's by introducing different steel elements and reinforcements to help control the deflection. But for sure, that is something to take into consideration when you start to deal with some of the dark products. It's going to take heat faster, and it's going to have an effect on the product overall. But I think most manufacturers have gotten up to speed on how to control that.
Is it potentially more damaging to the glass too? That thermal cycling are there seal failures and stuff like that more likely than if it was a light color?
No, I don't think so. I think that you're almost always installing that product on top of glazing blocks. There's usually a separation between the two. It might get hotter in the glazing pocket, but just the way that the IGUs are being manufactured now, I don't think that's causing a failure right now. Companies like Cardinal, just the massive insulating glass companies, they are primarily used on a lot of these companies that are introducing some darker windows right now. And I think you'd be seeing rampant seal failures if that was the case, which they're not. They're still performing and holding their 20-year warranty like they always have.
On a somewhat related but different note, my understanding is that energy performance has not been a priority in Texas housing by and large, but you told me that that's changing. Can you talk a little bit about that? And go ahead.
Yeah. So, obviously my perception is going to come from where I've been most of my career, which is in Austin, which is you kind of have to take on with a grain of salt. The state of Texas operates differently than Austin. Operates. Yeah. For sure. So, but beyond that, 8 to 10 years ago, the industry as a whole, I think, suffered a huge, the effects of greenwash. Everything was green, everything was energy efficient. and all of those kind of language kind of became meaningless. But a lot of those things really stuck around from, I think people through that whole process got experienced to some higher performing products and started to get a little bit of feel for what that could mean. And I think, at least here in Texas, with everything being so hot, I think a lot of homeowners realize that, oh, wow, it's kind of nice to sit in front of my windows and not feel like I'm in a greenhouse.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Occupant Comfort, the items from that whole green movement that focused on occupant comfort have really followed through. And so I think that really helped with, instituting blower door testing and some of the other things that
are you seeing air tightness testing widespread in Texas, or is it, limited to Austin?
It's pretty limited to Austin. We definitely have a few. If you get into some of the other larger cities, you have some of the higher end builders that'll pick it up because they realize that some of the more educated homeowners that's what they want. Mm-hmm. They're asking for that, and so that is helping tremendously. That it's just, and I guess that's what it boils down to, is an education. It's something like this. It's what you're doing right now. The introductions of podcasts and the massive amounts of content that you can get from YouTube is being a huge benefit in terms of educating homeowners and them understanding of what's important, what to ask for.
And do you see it changing more statewide going forward? Do you think or is it going to stay in limited areas?
Right now, I think it's going to be a slow movement. I don't see it being something that's going to change fast across the state, but I do see it becoming more and more of a thing in larger cities. I think another large part of the driving factor to the change, particularly in larger cities, is that Texas has become a huge target for construction litigation firms that you've seen pop up within the last 10 to 15 years.
Can we talk about that for one? I'm going to interrupt you. So part of that is because you guys have a huge housing market, and there are big builders who build thousands of units. So if you got a lawyer who's ambitious and wants to sue a big company, that's where you go, right?
That's right. That's exactly what we've been told by some of the attorneys from some of these firms is they've said that they've done an analysis in the largest markets, and they say, well, that's where we should go. And you can imagine some of the defects that they could walk up to any project anywhere in the state and be almost certain that they're going to find a few types of defects within the house, and all they've got to do is convince the homeowner to let them do a little bit of a exploratory things, and they're off to the races. And so I was actually walking a project with some of our installers a few weeks ago, and we're walking around the project, and our installers are noting just how pristine this particular builder's flashing job was. The pan flashing was beautiful. They're using Trimco Exo Air for the WRB, and just the detailing was immaculate. And they were lamenting that, man, why doesn't every builder do this? Like this should be something that every builder does. And the response is, well, this builder also has been through a $250 million lawsuit for water infiltration. And
it's tragic to me that it takes that.
That's what it takes.
It's not a good statement on our industry, but how often do you see flashing done correctly versus incorrectly when you're driving around town, right?
Almost never.
Almost never.
In fact, it's so rare that if you see it, you want to pull over and make a comment about it.
I love your flashing, man.
Yeah. You need to know you did this well. And there's a good chance that guy probably goes to the same groups that you go to anyway. So it's a pretty small community that understand the importance of that.
So on that subject, you told me earlier that you're a building science nerd too. Where does that come from, and how did you get into being in this weird business?
So I got into the industry right out of school. So I've always enjoyed construction. My dad was a civil engineer, and so growing up, just design was kind of a part of the way we spoke around the house, and always was going outside and build things. And from college, I got recruited by one of the national lumber yards to come to work for them right out of school, and that was in 2007. And so
doing sales, a year later, Corey?
Doing sales. I was going to be a lumber dumper. I was going to, sell sticks. And the market crashed, and when it crashed, I was still a trainee and was trying to figure out, what should I do? Where should I go? I've got virtually no training, and really all the large accounts that still existed were taken up by older, more experienced salesmen. And I realized that the lumberyard had a fledgling luxury window division. And so I decided to focus on that because no one else was focusing on that. And what I realized, particularly in the downturn, is luxury windows really never stopped. In fact, high-end housing really maintained or ramped up a little bit in a recession. And so I took over that department and started focusing on it. And from there, started learning more and more about windows and doors. And it's kind of a thing within the window business that once you get into windows, it's really hard to get out.
Yeah.
It just bites you. You get the bug. But you mentioned the building science side, but going through that, I remember some of the moments where I really got interested in building science, and it had everything to do with having to walk job sites with contractors. And as a window sales guy, having to talk through installation details. And you start talking to some cornice crews and lumber crews who are going to be installing the windows, and realizing that these guys don't follow the instructions ever.
Yeah. And so how do you deal with that?
And so it became just a risk management thing of realizing that they're not going to follow the instructions, and when this leaks, they're going to call me. And so I gotta know more about this and train them better. And so it became a huge initiative to go out and actually train the guys how to install the windows properly, not just sell them. More than anything, because we didn't want to get the phone call when the window leaked. And from that, getting into just the why and how of flashings, I got bit by the bug. You started to realize the system of construction, the overall building envelope, and how everything plays into everything else. And that's where I got into it.
How do you think we're getting it so wrong with teaching builders how to build houses and basic building science? It seems to be the rarity, not the norm.
Yeah, I think it's a cultural thing, to be quite honest. Just where our industry has been in the past. Construction is all about getting the project done. You got to get the project done quickly and efficiently. And I think a huge issue introduced into our craft had to do with specialization, meaning, a long time ago, a master craftsman was the framer, and he did the trim carpentry and did the painting, and he was responsible for all of the processes. And all of a sudden, over the course of the last, however long, we've segmented all that out. A trim carpenter is only a trim carpenter, a framer is only a framer, and an engineer is only an engineer, and an architect's only an architect. And I think the notion that you gain quality by focusing is wrong. I think in order to gain quality, you have to understand the parallel disciplines that surround whatever you're doing in order to do your job well. Because at the end of the day, the home is a system. It's not a machine built from various different parts. It's got all, or it is a machine built from different parts, but they all have to work together. And if you take it and drill it down just within windows, that is the problem that we see all the time, is that you walk up and a contractor is expecting the window guy to only talk about his windows. And when you want to start talking about how he's flashed his rough opening, he quickly says, well, no, that's not for you to worry about. That's for this guy to worry about. It's like, well, we have to have this conversation. And I think it's just a misunderstanding of who needs to be at the table to agree. And honestly, that's hard, because that requires trust. And what is it? Reid Hoffman says consistency, or trust is consistency over time. And it's hard to find contractors who are willing to develop their trades the way they should be.
Yeah, and they have a lot of pressure too, right? With cost pressures and clients who don't really understand the difference, and guys who don't charge enough because they don't know enough to charge more money. It's
that coupled with homeowners. There's a perception amongst homeowners that a home should be a certain thing, and a perception that code gives them a high quality house rather than code gives them something that just passed fail. And so I think homeowners, we find that as well. To dig back into flashings, you start talking about flashing details and how they should be done, and a homeowner's perception of what they're paying for is that it should be done right. When in effect, right is not always the standard. Sometimes the standard is just to make sure that it won't fall down.
Yeah. So this is my favorite part of the show. Can you tell me about your own house, and do you have any new or lingering problems that you're either happily or unhappily ignoring?
Gosh, what's the phrase? The cobbler's kids have no shoes.
Yes.
That
you're like the third or fourth person to say that on this show.
Yeah, it's horrendous. I've got non-thumbly broken aluminum windows. In fact, recently I put a rock through our front window with our lawnmower, and I had to replace it. And the notion of replacing it with non-low E insulated IGU just so it matches was just breaking my heart. But at the end of the day, I wasn't ready to replace all the glass in the house. But in fact, my wife just greenlit me finally putting a range hood over our oven, which I'm just unbelievably excited about.
Are you going to do that work yourself?
I am.
Cool.
Yeah.
You don't have a range hood at all right now?
What's that?
You don't have a range hood at all right now?
Well, I've got a range hood, but I've got the one that I think just about everyone else has, which just blows the air right back into the face of whoever's standing in front of it. And so it's virtually worthless. And so I've through all the building science podcasts and things that I listen to around the house, I've got my wife hook, line, and sinker when it comes to indoor air quality. So now she cannot not see the range every time it turns on. And so she said, "Yeah, let's put a range hood in." I think that makes sense.
So a couple questions about that. Is it on an exterior wall, and do you have a gas range?
It is a gas range. It is not on an exterior wall. So we are, I told her it sounds crazy, but I'm most excited about punching a hole in her roof.
Oh, you're going up. Okay. So you must be in a 1-story.
I'm going up.
Yeah.
Yes. It's a 1-story.
Most
Absolutely.
houses in Texas are, right?
It's a mixture. We definitely do have a lot of 1-stories. In Texas, we got a lot of room, right? So you can sprawl out a little bit more than you can anywhere else. And so, yeah, a 1-story here is definitely more sought after than anywhere else. But at least in Austin, it's probably a mixture.
I mean, Texas is like a whole bunch of places. I ask you about Texas, and that's like asking you about its own country, right? It's
yeah.
It's huge and diverse, and the landscape is varied. You have hot, humid Gulf Coast areas, and you have a desert. Yeah, it's very, very different.
Yeah, you go up north of Dallas, and you're all of a sudden dealing with very dry, cold. You're having to deal with ice, and you're having to deal with all the things that just you'll never deal with in Houston. So
Houston just got slammed with a hurricane, right?
Yeah, they sure did.
How's that going?
It's well. I hate to say that we're used to it, but we're used to it. It's amazing to see just how people pull together, particularly in the building science community. When there's a notion of we got to go fight mold, everyone gets really excited. So it's fun to see all the nerdy building scientists around here go in with their cameras and start tearing off drywall, and you essentially have an excuse to go in there and rip everything apart and go back with something better. So that is honestly the exciting part about all of that is it gives you an excuse to upgrade.
It's been a pleasure talking to you, Corey. Is there anything you want to ask or tell our listeners before we close up shop here?
I think above anything else, I can imagine a good portion of your listeners are home builders. They're people that are in the trade. And I think more than anything, I really want to say that I want us to continue this. I want us to continue conversations about building science and how to do things properly and well and how to elevate our craft. And at the end of the day, develop your trades, develop your people. Again, it goes back to consistency over time and building that team around you that can learn from the mistakes and do it better on the next house and do it better on the next house. And it's only by investing in your trades and bringing them along with you on that journey that we're going to see some real change.
Well said, Corey. Thank you. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Corey Claunch for joining us, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Thanks for listening, everyone. Stay safe. Happy building. Corey, you were awesome. Thanks.